Marcus Stone's empire crumbled with a single text message. Your crypto wallets are empty. All accounts frozen. Game over. He stared at his phone, watching 8 years of carefully laundered millions vanish into digital thin air, while his Miami penthouse felt like it was closing in around him. The betrayal tasted like copper in his mouth, because he knew exactly who had done this to him. And she was sitting 3 tables away, serving coffee, like she hadn't just destroyed his life. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. 2 hours earlier, Marcus had walked into Cafe Luna with one simple goal: mock the financial advice column this little waitress supposedly wrote for some blog nobody read. His lieutenant Jake had shown him the article titled "Cryptocurrency Security: Why Your Digital Fortune Isn't Safe," written by someone called E. Walsh, the same E. Walsh who refilled his espresso every Tuesday and Thursday, who stammered when he ordered extra foam, who looked at him like he was just another customer instead of someone who controlled half the underground economy in South Florida. At 32, Marcus had seen enough betrayals to recognize the signs, but Emma Walsh had been different. For the past 4 months since he'd started frequenting this cafe, she'd seemed genuinely nervous around him, authentically clumsy, exactly the kind of person who'd spill coffee and apologize 3 times. "Emma," he'd called out when she approached his table, that familiar mix of nervousness and professionalism in her green eyes. "I heard you give financial advice now." His voice carried that lazy Miami drawl he'd perfected, the kind that made people underestimate him right before he crushed them. "How about you tell me what you think about cryptocurrency investments? Just for laughs." She'd paused, coffee pot suspended mid-air, and for a moment he thought she'd run away like she usually did when he tried to start conversations. Instead, she set the pot down and looked him dead in the eye. "Mr. Stone, if you're storing cryptocurrency in hot wallets connected to the internet, you're basically handing your money to hackers with a bow on top." The words hit him like a cold slap, not because they were wrong, but because they were exactly right. And because Emma Walsh, 29-year-old waitress who drove a beat-up Honda and lived in a studio apartment, had just called out the exact security flaw he'd been ignoring for months. "Excuse me? Your digital assets," she continued, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. "You're probably using some fancy trading app that promises military-grade security, but you're keeping everything in wallets that are constantly online. That's like leaving your safe open and connected to a public Wi-Fi network." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. 3 months ago, his tech guy Tony had insisted they upgrade to a more efficient crypto management system, some startup app called Crypto Vault that promised better returns through automated trading. Tony had assured him it was foolproof. "And let me guess," Emma continued, now fully engaged in a way he'd never seen her before, "you're also using the same password across multiple platforms because it's easier to remember, and you've probably got 2-factor authentication running through your personal phone number instead of a separate authenticator." She might as well have been reading his diary. Marcus Stone, who could spot an undercover federal agent from 3 blocks away, who'd built a money laundering operation so sophisticated the FBI had been trying to crack it for 5 years, had apparently been caught making rookie mistakes by a woman whose biggest business decision was whether to offer oat milk as an upgrade. "How exactly?" he said slowly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made other patrons glance nervously in their direction. "Would you know what kind of security setup I'm using?" Emma's confidence wavered for just a moment, but then she straightened her shoulders. "Because every high-net-worth individual in Miami uses the same basic approach. They think throwing money at expensive services equals actual security, but real protection isn't about how much you spend. It's about understanding the technology you're trusting with your life." The irony wasn't lost on him. For years, he'd been the one delivering harsh truths to people who thought they were smarter than him. Now this waitress, this woman he'd been half-heartedly trying to ask out for months, was explaining exactly how vulnerable he'd made himself. His phone buzzed. A notification from Crypto Vault. "Unusual activity detected in your account." Marcus looked at the screen, then at Emma, then back at the screen, then back at... The timing was too perfect, too convenient. Either this was the universe's idea of a cosmic joke, or something much more calculated was happening. "Emma," he said, his voice dropping to that quiet tone that made his enemies start planning their own funerals. "I think we need to have a much longer conversation." But when he looked up from his phone, Emma Walsh was gone. Her coffee pot sat abandoned on his table, steam still rising from the spout, and the back door of the cafe was swinging shut like she'd vanished into thin air. Marcus Stone had been in the criminal business long enough to recognize a setup when he saw one. The question wasn't whether Emma Walsh had played him. The question was whether she was working for his enemies, or if she'd just accidentally stumbled into the middle of something that was about to get them both killed. Marcus stared at the swinging door where Emma had disappeared, his mind racing through possibilities like a computer processing malware. In his world, coincidences were usually bullets in disguise, and Emma Walsh had just demonstrated knowledge that could either save him or destroy what was left of his operation. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Jake calling, and the panic in his lieutenant's voice was immediate. "Boss, we got problems. Tony's missing, and every digital account we've got is showing zeros." "I'll be there in 20, Marcus said, ending the call before Jake could ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. He left a $50 bill on the table, old habits in a digital world, and walked out the front door like a man without a care in the world. The Miami sun hit his face, but all he could think about was the look in Emma's eyes when she'd explained his security flaws. Not the nervous deference he was used to, but the focused intensity of someone who actually understood what she was talking about. The drive to his Brickell Avenue office gave him time to think. Emma Walsh had been working at Café Luna for 6 months. He'd started going there because it was quiet, cash only, and the owner didn't ask questions about why someone paid for a $2 espresso with $100 bills. Emma had been there from his first visit, clumsy and apologetic, exactly the kind of person who'd blend into the background of his life. Except people who understood cryptocurrency security systems didn't usually serve coffee for tips. Jake was waiting in the parking garage when Marcus arrived, his usual calm replaced by the kind of nervous energy that preceded very bad news. "Boss, it's worse than I thought. Not just the crypto, our offshore accounts, the shell companies, even the cash we had spread across different banks. Someone didn't just hack us, they surgically removed every asset we had access to." Marcus felt a familiar cold rage building in his chest. Someone had declared war on him using weapons he didn't fully understand, and he'd been caught completely unprepared. What about Tony? Gone. His apartment's cleaned out, no forwarding address, and his phone goes straight to voicemail. Either he's dead, or he's the one who sold us out. The elevator ride to his office felt like ascending to his own execution. The penthouse that had once felt like a throne room now seemed like a very expensive prison. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of a city where he'd once felt untouchable, but power meant nothing if you couldn't pay for it. Marcus poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and tried to think like the strategic predator he'd always been instead of the victim he'd apparently become. In his experience, elaborate heists required inside information, technical expertise, and perfect timing. Tony provided the access, but someone else had provided the knowledge and coordination, someone like Emma Walsh. But something didn't add up. If Emma had been planning this from the beginning, why warn him about his security vulnerabilities? Why give him information that could have prevented exactly what had just happened? His laptop chimed with an encrypted message through a communication app he'd thought was secure. The sender was listed as EW, and the message was short. Roof 1 hour. Come alone. Marcus stared at the screen, weighing his options. This could be Emma offering to explain what had happened, or it could be his enemies using her to lure him into an ambush. In his old life, he would have sent Jake and 3 other guys to scout the location first. But his old life had disappeared, along with his digital fortune, and desperation had a way of making dangerous choices seem reasonable. Still, he wasn't completely reckless. Marcus spent 30 minutes running background checks through contacts who owed him favors. Emma Walsh had indeed worked at Café Luna for 6 months. Before that, she'd been unemployed for 2 months. Before that, she'd worked for Quantum Financial Security, a fintech startup that specialized in cryptocurrency protection services, the same company that had been approached by the FBI 8 months ago to help investigate cryptocurrency laundering operations. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place, but the picture they formed was more complex than simple betrayal. Emma hadn't been randomly placed at Café Luna. She'd chosen to work there, chosen to interact with him, chosen to warn him about vulnerabilities that someone else was clearly planning to exploit. He climbed the stairs to the roof, muscle memory checking for weapons he no longer carried. The Miami skyline stretched out below him, a reminder of everything he stood to lose if he'd miscalculated this situation. Emma was waiting by the edge, no longer wearing her cafe uniform. Instead, she had on dark jeans and a fitted blazer, that made her look like she belonged in the corporate towers surrounding them. Her nervous energy was gone, replaced by a stillness that made Marcus reassess everything he'd thought he knew about her. "You came," she said, without turning around. "Did I have a choice?" Marcus approached slowly, maintaining enough distance to react if this went sideways. "Considering you apparently know enough about my business to destroy it." "I didn't destroy anything," Emma replied, finally facing him. "I prevented something much worse from happening to you." "Prevented what exactly? Because from where I'm standing, losing everything I've spent 8 years building looks pretty bad." Emma reached into her blazer, and Marcus tensed, but she only pulled out a tablet. The screen showed financial transactions, cryptocurrency transfers, and what looked like federal seizure orders. "Tony wasn't just skimming money, Marcus. He was building a case against you for the FBI. Every transaction, every digital signature, every cryptocurrency purchase. He was documenting all of it." Marcus took the tablet, scanning through files that showed months of careful surveillance. Financial records he'd never seen, photographs of meetings he'd thought were private, and a federal indictment with his name at the top of a very long list. "They were planning to arrest you next week," Emma continued. "Tony was going to testify that you'd been using cryptocurrency to launder money for drug cartels and arms dealers. With the evidence he'd collected, you would have been looking at life in federal prison." The pieces were starting to come together, but Marcus still felt like he was solving a puzzle in the dark. "So you decided to steal my money to save me from the FBI? That's either the most elaborate rescue attempt in history, or you're running a very sophisticated con." "I didn't steal your money." Emma's voice carried a conviction that made him want to believe her. "I moved it. Every single cryptocurrency wallet, every offshore account, every asset Tony had flagged for seizure. I transferred it all before the FBI could freeze it." Marcus looked at her skeptically. "Into accounts I can't access. Into accounts that don't exist in any system the federal government can track." Emma smiled for the first time since he'd known her, and it transformed her face completely. "Marcus, I didn't just move your money. I made it invisible." The wind picked up, carrying the salt scent of Biscayne Bay and the promise of an afternoon storm. Marcus found himself in the strange position of hoping this woman was telling the truth, because the alternative was accepting that he'd been outplayed by someone he'd considered harmless. "Who are you really?" he asked. "Someone who left Quantum Financial Security the day they accepted a contract to help the FBI build a case against you," Emma replied. "Someone who's been watching this investigation develop for 8 months, and someone who decided you deserved a warning about what was coming." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Marcus realized he was standing on the edge of either salvation or complete destruction. The only way to find out which was to trust the woman who claimed to have saved him by stealing everything he owned. The first drops of rain hit the roof as Emma opened a secure app on her tablet, her fingers moving across the screen with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "Your money isn't gone, Marcus. It's just sleeping in places the FBI can't see." Marcus watched her work, noting the way she navigated between different cryptocurrency exchanges and digital wallets like a concert pianist moving across keys. This wasn't the nervous waitress who'd spilled coffee on his shoes 3 weeks ago. This was someone else entirely. "Blockchain technology is beautiful," she said, tilting the screen so he could see transactions flowing in real time. "Every movement gets recorded permanently, but only if you know how to read the breadcrumbs. Most people think crypto is anonymous, but it's actually the opposite. It's completely transparent if you know what you're looking at. And you know what you're looking at. I helped design some of these systems." Emma pulled up another screen, showing a web of interconnected wallets. "After college, I worked for a fintech startup that specialized in cryptocurrency security. We built tools for people who needed their digital assets to be both accessible and invisible." Marcus was beginning to understand that his assumptions about Emma Walsh had been not just wrong but dangerously naive. "What kind of people need their money to be invisible?" "People like you," she said simply. "Also journalists in hostile countries, dissidents hiding from authoritarian governments, and occasionally people whose assets get frozen by federal agencies that haven't figured out how modern money laundering actually works." The rain was picking up, forcing them toward the covered area near the stairwell. Marcus found himself studying Emma's face, looking for clues about her real motivations. "So you've been watching me for months, learning my routines, gaining my trust. Why?" "Because Tony approached Quantum Financial Security 8 months ago." Emma's expression darkened. He wanted to hire us to help him trace and document your cryptocurrency transactions. When my boss realized what kind of case Tony was building, he initially refused the contract. But Tony was persistent. He offered to pay triple our usual rate. Let me guess. Your boss reconsidered. My boss sold the company to a federal contractor 6 months ago. Emma's voice carried a bitterness that suggested personal experience with betrayal. The new owners were very interested in helping the FBI build cases against high-value targets. Tony's contract became their priority project. Marcus was starting to see the bigger picture, and it wasn't pretty. But you didn't agree with that decision. I quit the day they accepted Tony's contract. Emma pulled up another screen showing financial news headlines. But I kept monitoring the situation because I knew what was coming. The feds have been pressuring cryptocurrency exchanges to cooperate with law enforcement. Your money was going to disappear anyway, Marcus. I just made sure it disappeared in a direction you might eventually be able to reach. Marcus felt a moment of clarity, cutting through his paranoia. That's why you started working at Cafe Luna. You knew I went there. I spent 2 weeks learning your routines before I applied for the job. Emma's honesty was either refreshing or terrifying. I needed to understand who you were beyond the federal case file, whether you were someone worth saving. And your conclusion? You're exactly what you appear to be, Emma said, turning to face him. Someone who figured out how to profit from systems that were already broken. You didn't create the demand for money laundering services, Marcus. You just provided a more efficient supply. The rain had become a downpour, drumming against the roof with tropical intensity. Marcus found himself in the surreal position of discussing his criminal empire with someone who'd apparently risked her career to protect him from it. Why? He asked. Why risk everything to help someone you barely know? Emma was quiet for a long moment, watching the storm roll across Biscayne Bay. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. Because I've seen what happens when the federal government decides to destroy someone. They don't just take your money. They take your identity, your relationships, your ability to exist in normal society. And sometimes they do it to people who don't deserve it. You think I don't deserve it. I think the system that makes your business necessary is more criminal than anything you've ever done, Emma replied. But that's a philosophical discussion for another time. Right now we need to focus on practical survival. Marcus found himself oddly touched by her pragmatic assessment of his criminal career. Most people either condemned him completely or romanticized him as some kind of outlaw hero. Emma seemed to view him as something more complicated, a businessman operating in an illegal market. So what happens now? He asked. Assuming you're telling the truth about protecting my assets, how exactly do I access money that's been made invisible? That's where things get interesting. Emma pulled up a new screen showing what looked like a social media platform. Your money is distributed across 47 different cryptocurrency wallets, each one associated with a different digital identity. To access any of it, you'll need to prove you can navigate modern social networks without triggering algorithmic suspicion. Marcus stared at the screen, recognizing the interface of several apps he'd never bothered to understand. Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Snapchat, platforms that might as well have been written in ancient Greek for all the sense they made to him. You're joking. I'm completely serious. Emma's smile was back, and Marcus was starting to recognize it as her expression for announcing something particularly clever. Each wallet is linked to a social media account with carefully constructed online personas. To access your money, you'll need to maintain those personas convincingly enough to avoid algorithmic detection. In other words, you've hidden my criminal empire behind Instagram influencers. I've hidden your assets behind digital identities that exist in plain sight, Emma corrected. The FBI can trace cryptocurrency transactions, but they can't subpoena someone who doesn't legally exist. Your money is now controlled by 23-year-old lifestyle bloggers, cryptocurrency day traders, and tech startup founders who live entirely in the cloud. Marcus laughed despite himself. It was either the most brilliant money laundering scheme he'd ever encountered, or the most elaborate practical joke in criminal history. And I'm supposed to pretend to be a 23-year-old lifestyle blogger. You're supposed to learn how to manage digital identities the same way you learned how to manage offshore bank accounts. Emma handed him the tablet. The money is there, Marcus, but accessing it means entering a world where influence is currency and authenticity is performance art. Thunder crashed overhead, and Marcus realized he was standing at the edge of either evolution or extinction. His old empire had been built on traditional power structures, fear, loyalty, and violence. This new world Emma was offering operated on completely different rules. How long do I have to decide? The FBI is executing search warrants tomorrow morning, Emma said. By noon, every traditional account you've ever touched will be frozen. After that, the social media accounts become your only lifeline. Marcus looked out at the storm, then back at the woman who'd apparently just revolutionized criminal finance while serving him coffee. I'm going to need a very good teacher. That's why I'm here, Emma said, and for the first time, her smile reached her eyes. Welcome to the digital age, Marcus Stone. 24 hours later, Marcus sat in a Coconut Grove coffee shop that wasn't Café Luna, staring at his phone like it was a bomb he didn't know how to defuse. The Instagram account Emma had created for him showed a feed of luxury cars, expensive watches, and motivational quotes about entrepreneurship. According to his bio, he was Blake Morrison, a cryptocurrency consultant helping clients maximize their digital potential. You're holding it like it's going to bite you, Emma said, sliding into the seat across from him. She looked different again, younger somehow, with her hair in a messy bun and wearing clothes that screamed tech startup casual. Try to relax. You're supposed to be a millennial who grew up with this technology. Blake Morrison grew up with this technology, Marcus corrected. I grew up moving money through shell companies and bribing bank officials. This is like asking a master chef to cook using only a microwave. Emma laughed, and the sound made several other customers look their way. Marcus noticed she was drawing attention in a way that seemed deliberate, the kind of magnetic energy that made people want to be around her. Another skill he was apparently going to need to learn. The FBI raided your office this morning, she said quietly, her voice carrying under the ambient coffee shop noise. Jake called me, actually. Apparently you gave him my number before disappearing. Marcus felt a familiar tension in his shoulders. What did you tell him? That you'd been investigating Tony's betrayal and discovered the federal case against you. That you were implementing emergency protocols to protect your remaining assets. Emma pulled out her own phone, showing him news headlines about the raid. He seems to think you're playing some kind of three-dimensional chess game. Jake's loyal, but he's not particularly imaginative, Marcus said, scrolling through the articles, though he did ask me 3 times if I'd lost my mind when I told him to start learning about digital marketing strategies. He'll follow orders. But he's clearly skeptical about why I've suddenly become obsessed with social media marketing. Good, because that skepticism will make him more convincing when federal agents question him, Emma said. A lieutenant who enthusiastically embraces his boss's sudden personality change would raise suspicions. One who's confused but loyal is exactly what they'd expect. Marcus nodded, appreciating Emma's strategic thinking. What did you tell him about the specifics? That Blake Morrison would be implementing a new business model focused on legitimate cryptocurrency consulting services, that you were pivoting the operation to stay ahead of federal oversight. Emma leaned forward. Jake's smart enough to understand that successful criminals adapt to changing enforcement environments. And he accepted that? He accepted that his boss was making moves he didn't fully understand to protect the organization, Emma replied, which is probably how Jake has survived working for you this long. Marcus felt somewhat relieved. Jake's questioning but ultimately loyal response was consistent with how he'd always operated, following orders while maintaining enough independent thought to be valuable. Your first post needs to go live in the next hour, Emma continued. Something authentic but aspirational. The algorithm rewards consistency and engagement. Marcus looked at the draft post Emma had prepared, a photo of an expensive coffee cup with text about starting the day with intention and gratitude. It was the kind of content he'd usually mock, but apparently his financial survival now depended on his ability to create it convincingly. This feels like the world's most elaborate witness protection program, he said. That's not a bad way to think about it. Emma's phone buzzed and her expression shifted to something more serious, except we might have a problem. Tony surfaced. Marcus felt ice in his veins. Where? Federal courthouse in downtown Miami. He's not in custody, which means he's still cooperating with the investigation, but according to my sources, he's been asking questions about cryptocurrency security experts who might have helped you move assets. The coffee shop suddenly felt too public, too exposed. Marcus glanced around at the other customers, wondering if any of them were federal agents, private investigators, or Tony's new friends. He knows you helped me. He suspects someone helped you, But Tony doesn't know about my background, and the FBI doesn't know I exist in your orbit." Emma's voice remained calm, but Marcus could see tension in the way she held her shoulders. "As far as the official record shows, Emma Walsh is just a waitress who serves you coffee twice a week. But if he starts digging deeper, then Blake Morrison and his various digital personas become very important very quickly." Emma showed him another screen on her phone. "I've been monitoring the federal investigation through some back channels. They're frustrated because your traditional money laundering operation was more sophisticated than they expected, but they have no idea how to trace assets that have been converted into social media influence." Marcus was beginning to appreciate the elegance of Emma's solution. The FBI could seize bank accounts, freeze cryptocurrency exchanges, and subpoena financial records, but they couldn't arrest someone for having a successful Instagram presence, and they couldn't confiscate followers or engagement metrics. "How many of these digital identities did you create?" 47 distinct personalities across multiple platforms. Emma pulled up a spreadsheet that looked like a character roster for a very complicated movie. Each one has a complete backstory, consistent posting history, and carefully cultivated relationships with other accounts. Some are cryptocurrency traders, others are lifestyle influencers, a few are tech startup founders. Together, they control approximately $63 million in various digital assets. Marcus stared at the number, feeling something between relief and vertigo. "You moved $63 million without anyone noticing?" "I moved it in a way that looks like normal social media monetization." Emma's smile was back, and Marcus was starting to recognize it as her expression for announcing something particularly clever. "Sponsored posts, affiliate marketing, cryptocurrency promotions, NFT drops. Your criminal empire now looks like a very successful influencer marketing network. And to access this money, you become the kind of person who could legitimately earn it through social media." Emma handed him a tablet loaded with tutorials. Content creation, audience engagement, brand partnerships, cryptocurrency education. Think of it as learning a new language, except the vocabulary is hashtags and the grammar is posting schedules. Marcus scrolled through the tutorials, feeling like an anthropologist studying an alien civilization. "How long before I can access significant amounts?" "Depends on how quickly you can build authentic online presence." Emma checked her watch. "But we might not have as long as I hoped. My back-channel sources say the FBI is getting consulting help from a private cryptocurrency investigation firm." "The same firm you used to work for?" "Worse." Emma's expression darkened. "My former business partner, David Chen. He's the one who sold quantum financial security to the federal contractor, and he's the one who's now analyzing your cryptocurrency movements for the FBI. Is that significant?" "Very." Emma's voice carried a bitterness Marcus was beginning to recognize. "David knows my work patterns, my technical preferences, my methodological signatures. If anyone can trace what I did with your assets, it's him." The implications hit Marcus like cold water. If the FBI connected Emma to the missing money, her carefully constructed protection would collapse. And if Emma went down, she'd take his new digital empire with her. "What do you need me to do?" "Master your Blake Morrison persona faster than anyone has ever mastered social media." Emma stood up, and Marcus noticed several people in the coffee shop tracking her movement. "And hope that David Chen doesn't figure out who Emma Walsh really is before we can disappear completely." Marcus looked at his phone, at the Instagram account that represented his only hope of survival, and at the woman who'd apparently saved his life by turning him into someone he didn't recognize. "Emma? Yeah? If this works, I owe you more than money." "If this works," Emma said, her smile carrying a weight Marcus was only beginning to understand, "we'll both owe each other everything." The crisis hit at 3:47 a.m. on a Wednesday, when Marcus woke up to his phone buzzing with emergency notifications. Blake Morrison's Instagram account was being flooded with comments from users questioning the authenticity of his posts, and several cryptocurrency influencers were publicly calling him a federal plant. Someone had connected Blake to Marcus Stone, and the digital empire Emma had built was collapsing in real time. Marcus called Emma immediately, not caring that it was nearly 4 in the morning. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with alert concern. "I know, I've been watching it happen for the past hour. Someone leaked information connecting your old identity to Blake's online presence." "Tony? Worse." Emma's voice carried a bitterness that made Marcus's stomach drop. "David Chen. He's been analyzing the cryptocurrency movements for the FBI, and he recognized my methodology. He knows I'm the one who moved your assets. Marcus felt the familiar rage building, but tempered it with the strategic thinking that had kept him alive in the criminal world. What exactly does he know? Everything. Emma sounded tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. David and I were business partners at Quantum Financial Security before everything went wrong. We developed most of these cryptocurrency security techniques together. He knows how I think, how I code, how I structure digital operations. What he doesn't know is where we are right now, or how we're going to respond to being exposed. Marcus was already getting dressed, muscle memory preparing for a crisis, even though this wasn't the kind of problem he could solve with traditional methods. Tell me about David Chen. Brilliant programmer, ambitious beyond ethics, and someone who's never forgiven me for refusing to help him build surveillance tools for federal agencies. Emma's voice gained edge as she spoke. When Quantum got the FBI contract, I thought it was a temporary compromise. David saw it as a permanent business model. We had a falling out when I discovered he was planning to sell client data to multiple federal agencies simultaneously. And now he's targeting us specifically. He's targeting me, Emma corrected. David takes professional disagreements very personally. When he realized I was the one who moved your assets, this became about proving he was right to embrace federal partnerships, and I was wrong to resist them. Marcus recognized the dynamic. Personal vendettas disguised as professional competition were common in his world, though they usually ended with violence rather than cryptocurrency analysis. Options? We can run. I've got emergency protocols that could get us both out of the country within 12 hours. New identities, untraceable transportation, enough liquid assets to disappear permanently. Emma paused. Or we can fight back. What does fighting back look like in this situation? We prove that David Chen has been manipulating federal investigations for personal profit. Emma's voice gained energy as she spoke. I've been documenting his methods for months, Marcus. He's not just helping the FBI build cases, he's actively creating evidence to support prosecutions. What he's doing isn't just unethical, it's criminal. Marcus recognized the tone in her voice. It was the same cold determination he'd heard in his own voice when planning to destroy enemies who'd made the mistake of underestimating him. You want to take him down. I want to destroy him the same way he's trying to destroy us. Emma's anger was controlled but absolute. David Chen has been using his FBI consulting contract to access confidential financial information, which he then uses to identify high-value targets for his private investigation business. He's basically running a protection racket with federal backing. And you can prove this? I can prove it if we can access his private servers before he realizes I'm coming for him. Emma's plan was becoming clearer, but it means using your remaining digital assets to fund a very sophisticated hacking operation. Everything we've saved could be gone if this doesn't work. Marcus found himself in the strange position of risking his criminal fortune to prove someone else's criminality. The irony wasn't lost on him, but survival had always required adaptation to unexpected circumstances. What do you need? Access to Blake Morrison's cryptocurrency wallets, authorization to liquidate approximately 15 million in digital assets, and 12 hours to execute the most complex cyber attack I've ever attempted. Emma's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd been planning this contingency for longer than she'd admitted. Also, you'll need to maintain Blake's social media presence while I'm working. The algorithm punishes accounts that go silent during crises. Marcus looked at his phone, where Blake Morrison's Instagram was still being bombarded with accusations and conspiracy theories. The idea of responding to social media attacks while Emma fought a digital war felt surreal, but he was beginning to understand that modern battles were fought on multiple fronts simultaneously. Send me the wallet access codes, he said. And Emma, if David Chen is as dangerous as you say, make sure you're not fighting this alone. I won't be alone. Emma's smile was audible in her voice. I've got allies David doesn't know about. People who've been waiting for someone to take him down. 3 hours later, Marcus was sitting in a South Beach internet cafe, managing Blake Morrison's social media crisis, while Emma orchestrated what she called aggressive digital archaeology from a location she wouldn't disclose. Blake's Instagram story showed him calmly addressing the controversy, positioning himself as a victim of jealous competitors trying to destroy his reputation. The responses were better than Marcus had expected. Several legitimate cryptocurrency influencers defended Blake's authenticity, and his follower count actually increased as people rallied against what they perceived as unfair attacks. Marcus was learning that social media controversies could be converted into engagement opportunities if handled correctly. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Emma. "Found what we needed. David Chen has been using FBI resources to research targets for his private clients. Also discovered he's been manipulating evidence in at least 6 federal cases, preparing to release everything in 4 hours." Marcus felt a familiar anticipation that usually preceded the destruction of his enemies, but this time the battlefield was public opinion and digital evidence rather than violence and intimidation. Emma was about to wage war using transparency as a weapon. The counterattack began at noon. David Chen's professional reputation disintegrated in real time as Emma released meticulously documented evidence of his corruption across multiple platforms simultaneously. Financial records, email communications, recordings of conversations where he discussed manipulating federal investigations. Everything appeared with the kind of coordinated precision that made it impossible to ignore or discredit. Within 6 hours, David Chen was suspended from his FBI consulting contract, under investigation by 3 different federal agencies, and facing criminal charges for abuse of federal resources. The men who'd been pursuing Marcus Stone suddenly found themselves defending against accusations that their entire case had been built on manipulated evidence. Marcus watched it happen from Blake Morrison's perspective, live-tweeting commentary about corruption in cryptocurrency investigation, while his real identity remained safely hidden behind layers of digital personas Emma had created. "It's over," Emma called him as the sun set over Miami. "David Chen is finished. The FBI case against you has been compromised beyond repair, and Blake Morrison is trending as a whistleblower who exposed government corruption. And our money, safer than it's ever been." Emma's voice carried exhaustion mixed with triumph. Blake Morrison's brand value just increased exponentially. The social media accounts we created are now worth more than the assets they were designed to hide. Marcus realized Emma had accomplished something beyond just saving his criminal empire. She'd transformed it into something that generated value through legitimate means, something that existed in plain sight, without requiring secrecy or violence. "Emma," he said, watching the Miami skyline light up as darkness fell, "I think we need to talk about what comes next." "What comes next?" Emma replied, "is that Blake Morrison builds the kind of business empire Marcus Stone could never have imagined." 6 months later, Marcus stood on the balcony of his new penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay, watching Emma conduct a live streaming session where she explained cryptocurrency security to an audience of 2 million followers. She'd become the face of their operation, the public personality behind what everyone assumed was Blake Morrison's business empire, while Marcus had learned to operate as the strategic mind behind carefully curated digital personas. The transformation had been more complete than either of them had anticipated. Blake Morrison Enterprises was now a legitimate consulting firm that helped high-net-worth individuals protect their digital assets. Emma Walsh had become Emma Blake, cryptocurrency educator and digital security expert, and Marcus Stone had officially died in a boating accident off the coast of Key Largo. His body never recovered. His criminal empire dissolved into legends and federal case files. "The beautiful thing about blockchain technology," Emma was saying to her camera, "is that it makes traditional money laundering obsolete. Why hide money when you can make it completely transparent but mathematically secure?" Marcus smiled, recognizing the irony in her words. They'd built a business that taught people how to protect their assets, using the same techniques Emma had originally used to save his criminal fortune. The difference was that everything they did now was completely legal, transparently documented and publicly celebrated. His phone buzzed with a message from Jake, his former lieutenant who'd seamlessly transitioned into managing the legitimate aspects of their operation. "Boss, we just got approached by the DEA. They want to hire us to help them trace cryptocurrency movements in drug cases. Also, I have to say, 6 months ago I thought you'd completely lost your mind with all this social media stuff. Now I'm starting to think you were playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers." Marcus laughed out loud. The federal government was now trying to pay him to help them investigate the kind of crimes he'd once committed, and Jake had finally come around to understanding the strategy. The circular logic of it felt like justice served with a generous side of irony. "What's so funny?" Emma asked, finishing her live stream and joining him on the balcony. "Jake says the DEA wants to hire us as consultants." Marcus showed her the message. Apparently our reputation for being able to trace untraceable cryptocurrency has impressed some people in law enforcement. Also, he finally admits that maybe I knew what I was doing with this digital transformation. Are we going to accept? Marcus considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, the idea of voluntarily working with federal agents would have been unthinkable. But Blake Morrison Enterprises wasn't Marcus Stone's criminal empire. It was something new, something that existed in the space between legal and illegal, where most modern fortunes were actually built. What do you think? He asked. Emma looked out at the bay, where expensive yachts floated like white sculptures against the blue water. I think we've gotten very good at helping people solve problems they can't solve themselves. Whether those people are criminals hiding from the FBI or FBI agents tracking criminals doesn't really matter, as long as we get paid, as long as we stay in control of our own story. Emma turned to face him, and Marcus noticed she was wearing a necklace he'd never seen before, something expensive but understated, the kind of jewelry that suggested wealth without announcing it. The criminal world you came from was always about taking power from other people. This world we've built is about creating value that didn't exist before. Marcus nodded, understanding what she meant. Marcus Stone had stolen money and laundered it through shell companies and offshore accounts. Blake Morrison helped people create legitimate wealth using cryptocurrency and digital platforms. The technical skills were similar, but the social context was completely different. There's something else, Emma said, and Marcus recognized the tone that usually preceded important revelations. I've been thinking about what comes after this. After we've helped enough people, made enough money, built enough legitimacy to last. Retirement? Legacy. Emma pulled out her tablet, showing him architectural plans for what looked like a very sophisticated educational facility. I want to build a school, not just for cryptocurrency and digital security, but for people who need to understand how power actually works in the modern world. Marcus studied the plans, recognizing the vision behind them. Emma wanted to teach other people the skills that had saved his life and transformed his identity. She wanted to democratize the knowledge that allowed people to navigate between legal and illegal, visible and invisible, powerful and powerless. Students like us? Students like who we used to be. Emma's voice carried a conviction that made Marcus understand this wasn't just an idea she'd been considering. This was something she'd been planning since the day she'd first approached him on the roof. People who are smart enough to see how systems really work, but who've never had access to the tools that could change their circumstances. Marcus realized Emma was describing a revolution disguised as an educational institution. She wanted to teach people how to use cryptocurrency, social media, and digital platforms to create power for themselves, rather than simply transferring it to existing elites. And you want Blake Morrison to fund this school? I want Marcus Stone's criminal empire to fund it. Emma's smile was back, but this time it carried something Marcus had never seen before. Hope mixed with determination. Every dollar you ever made from money laundering, every asset you ever hid from federal investigators, every connection you ever built in the underground economy, I want all of it channeled into something that helps people instead of harming them. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that Emma was offering him something he'd never thought to want. Redemption that didn't require confession or punishment, transformation that honored his skills while redirecting their purpose. A school for criminals who want to become entrepreneurs. A school for people who understand that the difference between criminal and entrepreneur is usually just access to better lawyers. Emma handed him the tablet. What do you think? Marcus looked at the plans, then at Emma, then out at the city where he'd once ruled through fear and now existed through influence. The Blake Morrison Foundation Academy would teach cryptocurrency security, digital marketing, social media strategy, and what Emma called ethical influence architecture. Students would learn how to build wealth, protect assets, and create legitimate businesses using the same techniques that had once been available only to criminals and corporations. I think, Marcus said slowly, that Marcus Stone's greatest crime was thinking small. Emma laughed, and the sound carried across the water like a promise. Blake Morrison is going to think much bigger. As the sun set over Miami, Marcus realized he was no longer the same man who'd walked into Cafe Luna asking for financial advice as a joke. He wasn't Marcus Stone, the criminal who'd built an empire through violence and intimidation. He wasn't even Blake Morrison. the digital entrepreneur who'd learned to profit from social media influence. He was something new entirely, someone who understood power in all its forms and had chosen to use it to create possibilities instead of destroying them. And Emma Blake, had been the catalyst for that transformation from the very first moment she'd looked him in the eye and told him his security was broken. The waitress who'd served him coffee had become his business partner, his teacher, and the architect of his salvation. The Mafia boss who'd asked for financial advice as a joke had discovered that the best jokes were the ones that revealed uncomfortable truths about the world. And together, they'd built something that was more valuable than either of them had imagined. A future where intelligence and creativity mattered more than fear and violence, where influence was earned rather than imposed, and where the skills that made someone a successful criminal could be transformed into the tools for legitimate revolution. The Blake Morrison Foundation Academy would open its doors in 18 months, funded by cryptocurrency that had once been dirty money and managed by people who understood that the most powerful changes happened when you worked within systems while gradually transforming them from the inside. If you're watching this story, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because the revolution Emma and Marcus were building wasn't just about them, it was about anyone who'd ever felt powerless and wanted to learn how power actually worked in the digital age. Sometimes the best financial advice comes from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes asking the right question to the right person can transform your entire world, even if you're just joking when you ask it.